Okay, this is the second shir for the Shagged Simin Yz2, which is discussing how late you can daven mincha. So what we saw in the first shir was, it seems to be machlokes between Tosfos and Rabbeinu Yonah on the one hand, who hold that you have only until Shkia, even though Rabbeinu Tam holds that Shkia is still the middle of the day for all other halachos. When it comes to davening mincha, that's the end of the zman. And the Shagged Aryeh, on the other hand, and we're going to see, he's going to eventually bring other Rishonim that hold like him, which is going to be important because you don't want to argue with Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Yonah without anyone else on your side. But he holds that you have until Tzeitzah Chochavim. And what we saw was that this would seem to have to do with the din of how late you could sprinkle the blood of the carbon tamid, because the tefillos are keneged the tamidim, and therefore whenever you could sprinkle the blood of the carbon, that's when you should be able to daven, because sprinkling the blood is the main part of the carbon. So Tosos, we brought a Gemara in Zvachim. The Gemara in Zvachim said that the blood becomes possible at Shkias Achama, and Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, had a very systematic way of deciding what the Gemara means when it says Shkias Achama, because there's two different types of phrases. There's Shkias Achama and Mishatishka Achama, and therefore Tosfos says when it says Shkias Achama in Zvachim, so that refers to the Tchilas Shkia, as we say, and that fits with his Shita, and that's what the Gemara over there is referring to. The Shagged Aryeh disagrees, and he says it's referring to Tzeitzah Chochavim, and we discussed also the fact that the Gemara there seems to bring an extra pasuk. What is the Chiddush of the Gemara? According to Rabbeinu Tam, the Chiddush is that even though it's still during the day, you no longer can sprinkle the blood, and according to Shagged Aryeh, we spoke about other Chidushim, perhaps the additional 3 blood applications of the carbon chatas, which are not makiv, those also have to be done during the day. Okay, so one of the things that Tosfos discussed was the Gemara in Pesachim, which is also going to be very clear that the Zman of Shechita really ends during the day, not at Tzeitzah Chochavim. And this Gemara we're going to see inside, and it is Os Vav in the Mar Makomos, and Tosfos says as follows. Mishnah, Ezuhi Derech Rechoka. What's considered far away from Yerushalayim, or from the Beis HaMikdash, where a person becomes patur from the Chiyuv Kares of not bringing a Karban Pesach, Min HaModim Ulachutz, from Modim and further away, Uchmidas L'chol Ruach, and that distance in all directions. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that's what Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, we don't really need Rabbi Eliezer Shita for our discussion. Let's skip down to the Gemara. Amar Ula. So Ula says, Min Hamudian Liyushalayim, Chamisha Asar Milan Havia. The distance from Mudiam to Yerushalayim, which is this distance of Derech Rechoka that we're discussing, is 15 mil. Sabarla, Ki Hada Amar Rabbi Bar Achana. He holds like what Rabbi Bar Achana says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Yochanan. Kama Mahalich Adam Biyom. How far can a person walk in one day? Asara Parsos, 10 Parsos. A Parsa consists of 4 mil. So we're talking about 40 mil for an entire day's walk. That's from Alos until Tzeis. Me'alos hashachar vad neitz hachama chamishas milan. From Alos until Neitz, a person can walk 5 mil. Now, in the end, we don't hold like Ula. We hold there's only 4 mil in between Alos and Neitz. But Ula at this point is saying there's 5 mil from Alos until Neitz. And then Mishkias Acham vad Tzeitzah Chochavim chamishas milan. Same thing from Shkia until Tzeis, which again also we don't hold that there's 5 mil. We hold only 4 mil. But Ula at this point in the Gemara holds it's 5 mil. So there's 5 mil from Alos until Neitz. There's 5 mil from Shkia until Tzeis. Pashulhu Tlasin. So you have 30 mil that a person can walk in between Neitz and Shkia.
How much is 1 mil?
A mil is 18 minutes. Saying how long is it? It's 2,000 amos. So 2,000 amos should be walked in 18 minutes. So you can do, so you have the 40 mil for the whole day, 5 from Alos until Neitz, 5 from Shkia until Tzeis, so you're left with 30 in the middle. Mitzafra l'pal g'dioma Chamisar mitzafel palgiyoma. So you can walk 15 mil from Nates until Chatzos Hayom. The Chamisar mi palgiyoma lu'urta. And you have 15 mil from Chatzos until the evening. Evening in this case, obviously being Shkia. Ula Tameh, and this is Ula according to his Shita. Damar Ula says, Eza hu derech rechoka, what's considered far away? Kol she'ein yachal likanis b'shas shchita, as long as you can't come in when the time is to shech the Korban Pesach. So what we see from here is that the time of shechting the Korban Pesach seems to be from Chatzos until Shkia. You don't have until after Shkia, because the person, if he's 15 mil away, that's as much time as it takes him for him to walk from Odian until he gets into the Beis HaMikdash, and he has to do that before the time of Shechita is over. The time of Shechita seems like it's saying from here until Shkia. Right? So he has to be able to get to the Beis HaMikdash before Shkia. So we see very clearly that the Shechita Pesach, Korban Pesach, has to be done before Shkia. Now, we saw in Tosos there was a shita that this is only a din d'Rabbanan, right? It's not a din d'Oraisa. The Shkia as opposed to Tzeis HaChochavim. Really, d'Oraisa you have until Tzeis, and the Rabbanan made it earlier until Shkia. And we spoke about how there's really two Tosos that say the same ideas. One was the Tosos that we saw inside, which was the Tosos in Psacha in Menachos, but there's a similar parallel Tosos in Zvachim, and the Shagat points out that Tosos in Zvachim is a little bit mashma, that according to that shita that's only d'Rabbanan, that it only applies to Korban Pesach. And it doesn't apply to the other Karbanos. So while it's true that we see from the Gemara in Psachim that you have to shech the Korban Pesach before Shkia, but that may only apply to the Korban Pesach. If it only applies to the Korban Pesach, so it's not going to impact our halacha in regards to Tfilas Mincha, because Tfilas Mincha isn't based on the Zman for Korban Pesach. Tfilas Mincha is based on the Zman for the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim. So that's one thing to keep in mind from the raya of this Gemara. And there's a second major point, which is that not everyone understands the Gemara the same way as Tosos. Tosos understood that your chiyuv basically starts at Chatzos. That's when you have to start thinking about walking to Yerushalayim. So if you can walk and get to Yerushalayim before Shkia, so then you have to go. And if not, so then you're considered too far away. The Rambam understands completely differently. If you look in the Rambam, which is the 7th Maramah Mos Zayin, the Rambam in Hilchos Korban Pesach, Perek Halacha Tes, he says as follows: Mi shahaya beino v'in Yerushalayim Yomar Basar im Aliyas Hashemesh Chamish Asar Mil. If at the time the sun comes up on the 14th of Nisan, he finds himself 15 mil away from Yerushalayim, or more than that, Harei Zederech Rechoka, so that's considered too far away. Haya beino v'ina polos mizeh. If there's less than 15 mil, eino b'derech rechoka, so then he's not considered far away. Hu yachol hagil Yerushalayim achar Chatzos, because he could get to Yerushalayim after Chatzos. Kishiyah halich baragel v'nachas, if he walks slowly. So it seems clear, I would say at least 90% clear from the Rambam, that we're measuring the 15 mil based on the morning until Chatzos. If he can get there by the beginning of the Zman of the Shchitas Korban Pesach, so then he's not considered far away. So we look at where he is, and that's clear from the Rambam. We look at where he is at Alos. If at Alos he's within 15 mil of Yerushalayim, so then he's considered close. Why? Because he could get to Yerushalayim by Chatzos. If he's farther away at Alos, so then he's considered far away. So we can't learn anything from this Gemara about when the end of the Zman Shechita is, because the Rambam is referring only to the beginning of Zman Shechita. Right? So it's true, we're talking about the 15 mil, but the 15 mil has nothing to do with the end of Shechita, and therefore maybe you could shecht all the way until Tzeis HaChochavim. The Ravid writes on the Rambam, Eino Tofis Derech Gemara, that the Rambam didn't understand the Gemara. That's what the Ravid writes. And the Shagat is going to proceed to explain many questions against the sheet of the Rambam. So, one question that he asks on the Rambam is why would we count the 15 mil, the distance that a person is away from Yerushalayim, based on Neitzachama, as we explained, there's 15 mil from Nates until Chatzos. If you would go from Alos HaShachar, you'd have 20 mil from Alos HaShachar until Chatzos. So the fact that we're using 15 mil, right, which is clear from the Gemara, means that if we're going to understand it like the Rambam, he's going from Nates HaChama until Chatzos. That's the time period we're looking at. Now, if for whatever reason the Rambam, which we're going to discuss in a second, if for whatever reason the Rambam is going to hold that we're looking at the beginning of the day as the beginning of his chiyuv, when he has to start worrying about getting to Shalayim, the beginning of the day always begins at Alos. Nates is already considered into the day. So, we, by all mitzvahs of the day, we generally l'chachila start at Nates, but it's only a takana d'Rabbanan. The day begins at Alos HaShachar. So why would we not view his chiyuv as if it began at Alos HaShachar? And if he's 20 mil away at Alos HaShachar, then he has to go to Yerushalayim. If he's further than that, then he doesn't. Why are we picking out Nates HaChama as the starting point for this Derech Rechoka? That's the question of the Shagas Aryeh. The Shagas Aryeh leaves this question unresolved, but there's actually a very good answer to this question, which I saw in the Kuntres Acharon, which in my volume of the Shagas Aryeh is quoted in the footnotes on the bottom. And I think, if I remember correctly, I was thinking about this before I saw it as well. And that is that the halacha is you're not really supposed to travel when it's dark out. You should only travel when it's light. And that's darshan from the pasuk of Kitov. You should travel when it's light out. And we can very easily say that traveling when it's light out means that you should not be traveling until it's Nates HaChama. At Alos HaShachar, it's still dark outside. So therefore, when we're discussing how much distance is there between where the person is standing now and Yerushalayim, in regards to being able to get there in time to Shech the Korban Pesach, and according to Rambam, that's the earliest time to Shech the Korban Pesach, he has to be able to get there. So we would look to the time when he should be traveling, which is when it's light outside, and that's going to be from Nates HaChama. So therefore, it does make sense that we're going to measure this distance based on Nates HaChama and not based on Alos HaShachar, even if perhaps his chiyuv begins at Alos. His chiyuv to start worrying about getting to Yerushalayim maybe starts at Alos, but he wouldn't start traveling at that point because it's still dark outside. That would be the answer to that question. However, this that the Rambam understands that his chiyuv of being Mekayim the Korban Pesach begins at Alos HaShachar as opposed to Chatzos, and that would really be the two ways of looking at it. Is that Tosfos says the person doesn't have to start walking to Yerushalayim at all until Chatzos. Once the time of the chiyuv starts, now he has to say, okay, now I have to start getting there. So if you're too far, you're too far. If you're close enough, so you're close enough. That begins at Chatzos, at the Zman when you can start shechting the Korban Pesach. But what about the Rambam? The Rambam seems to say that, no, you have to start thinking about that already in the beginning of the day, even though it's not actually a time to shech the Korban Pesach yet. We're going to see from the Gemara in Zvachim that it's very clear. This is on the third page of the Markos. Those pages are actually not numbered, so it's going to make things slightly difficult. But Os Ches in the Markos is we see that the chiyuv on a person to bring the Korban Pesach starts at Chatzos. Right? We don't view it as if he has the chiyuv yet before Chatzos, which would seem to fit into the shita of Tosfos, not the shita of the Rambam. And how does that work? It says the Eino Cholik V'Ochel Lachol, that a person who's an onin, that's what it's referring to over here, he's not able to take a portion in order to eat that night when he's no longer going to be an onin. So the diak we make from that Mishnah is mifliku de lo palik. He can't take a portion, right? If he's a kohen, he can't take a portion from the karbanos. The chimizamni le'achal, but if he would get some meat from a karban, he would be able to eat it that night. And there's two different dinim when it comes to kohen and the kadshim. One is there are certain kohanim that actually get a portion. In other words, when we divide it up, this kohen gets a portion, this kohen gets a portion, this gets a portion. But then which kohanim could eat it is not lav dafka the same as the kohanim that get the portion. Those kohanim can share it with other kohanim that might not be able to get a portion, but they can still eat the karban. There are people like that. So the diak we're making is the onin would fit into that category, that he doesn't get a portion because he can't do the avoda, but that night he would be able to eat kudshim. He doesn't have an issur of eating kudshim. The problem is, Veramin, he'll ask a steer. It says, onin tova v'ochels pischol erev avlo v'kudshim. An onin, he could go to the mikvah and eat his korban pesach in the evening. In other words, that evening after he was an onin. but not any other kachim. For any other kachim, there's a din derabanan that he's not allowed to eat kachim even the night after that he's an onin. Right? So here we're saying that he could by the Korban Pesach eat that night, but not by other karbanos. The Mishnah seemed to imply that by all karbanos he could eat at night. So that's a stira. And we're going to skip, the photocopy actually also skips many lines until we get to Abaye Omar, to the answer of Abaye. And Abaye says, Lukash, it's not difficult. Kan shemis konu chatzos, kan shemis lacha chatzos. One's talking about where the mace died before chatzos, and one's where the mace died after chatzos. Konu chatzos, delo ichsi lepesach, chayla leaninos. If the relative died before chatzos, so he was not yet fit to bring a Korban Pesach, and therefore the aninus rests upon him, right? Because there's no conflicting issue here, right? Aninus conflicts with the Korban Pesach because if he's an oni, he's not going to be able to bring the Korban Pesach. But here he doesn't have the chiyuv of Korban Pesach yet because it's still the morning. It's not chatzos yet, and therefore the aninus does take effect. Acher chatzos, but if the relative died after chatzos, the Ichsil Pesach, it's already the time to bring the Korban Pesach. Lo chayla yaninus, the aninus doesn't go on him at all, and therefore he brings the Korban Pesach, or they bring the Korban Pesach for him, and then that night he'll eat from the Korban Pesach and he'll be yotzei. If he was an onain from before the chiyuv, and it was before chatzos, so then he'd be an onain and he'd be pasha from Korban Pesach. Uminot tamer deshani leibin chunu chatzos bin lacher chatzos. How do we know this? Titania, one brisa says, La yatama, that a Kohen becomes tummy to his sister, mitzvah. And that's a mitzvah. Right? It's a list of all the people he has to become tummy to. And we learn from these words of the pasuk that he has a mitzvah to become tummy. Lo ratzon, if he doesn't want to become tummy, mitamno so al karcho, we make him become tummy. He doesn't have a choice. Umaisa Yosef HaKohen shemisa ishto b'erev HaPesach. There's a story. Yosef HaKohen, his wife, passed away erev Pesach. Lo ratzon l'tamei, he didn't want to become tummy, because then he's not going to be able to bring the Korban Pesach. The Nimnu Achav HaKohanim, his brothers, the Kohanim, they voted, in other words, I guess they decided, they came together and made a decision, the Timu Val Karcho, and they made him become Tameh. So we see what happens if a person is Erev Pesach, and he knows if he becomes Tameh to a relative, he's not going to be able to bring the Korban Pesach. Too bad, he has to become Tameh to the relative. That's his Chiyuv now, and he's potter from Korban Pesach. Vermini, we'll ask a stira. There's a different brisa that says ulachoso, when it says that he becomes tummy to his sister. I believe this is actually referring to the psukim by the Kohen Gadol that he does not become tummy to his sister. Kohen Gadol does not, and all the different relatives that are listed in those psukim are often extra. So we darshan from there. Or what's the coming to teach us? Harisha halach lishkot piskos. It's teaching us a case that if a person is going to shech Korban Pesach, v'lamos beno, or to give his son a bris, v'shama shemis lomis, and he hears that a relative died. Yachol yatama, you might think he should become tummy to the relative. Amarta, lo yatama, so therefore the pasuk says, don't become tummy. Yachol kashim shlo yatam lachos, so you might think just like a person should not become tummy to his sister if he's on the way to bring a Korban Pesach. So also he should not become tummy to Meis Mitzvah. Tamal Lomar Ulachosu. That's what this pasuk of Ulachosu teaches us by the Kohen Gadol. That Lachosu Hudeinu Matami, he should become tummy to his sister. Of Matami Hu Meis Mitzvah, he should become tummy to Meis Mitzvah. And we already had a different pasuk that taught us that the Kohen Gadol becomes tummy to Meis Mitzvah. So therefore this pasuk is talking about a person that's going to shech his Korban Pesach. What we see clearly from the beginning of the brisa is that to become tummy to a relative, not. Since he's on the way to bring a Korban Pesach, he does not become tummy to the relative, and instead he brings the Korban Pesach, right? Because there's two things that contradict one another. You can only do one of the two. The first brisa we said he has to become tummy. In the second brisa we said he can't become tummy, he has to bring the Korban Pesach. It's a stira. And we answer, Lav Shemami, no, don't we see from here that kan konum chatzos, kan la'achar chatzos, one's talking about before chatzos, one's talking about after chatzos. So we see clearly from this Gemara that if we're looking to determine whether the chiyuv of Korban Pesach has yet taken effect on a person, that we're looking at chatzos. We're not looking at the beginning of the day of the 14th. And that would fit in with the way Tosfos understands the Gemara of Derech HaChokah, right? That we only tell the person he has to start heading to Yerushalayim by chatzos, not like the way the Rambam understood, where he has to start walking to Yerushalayim at Netzach Hama. That's the second question that the Shagas Aryeh asked on the Rambam. Another question the Shagas Aryeh asks is that if it was true, like the Rambam says, that the Chiyuv does start in the beginning of the day, right? Netzach Hama or Lusa Shachar. So then why would the distance be dependent on when he could reach Yerushalayim by Chatzos? You don't have to be there the first second to bring the Korban Pesach. Right? Even if you get there later, all the way until, we're not sure, right? Or all the way until the end of this Zman, you could still bring the Korban Pesach. So why wouldn't we say, if your Chiyuv really does begin, let's say at Netzach Hama, to start getting to Yerushalayim, why wouldn't we say, if you could get to Yerushalayim before the end of the Zman of Shechita, then you have to go, and if not, then you're too far away. Why would we limit it to the beginning of the Zman Shechita? Doesn't seem to make any sense. So, Shagas Aryeh wants to maybe venture to explain based on a different halach of the Rambam, which discusses exactly what the idea of derech hachoka is in regards to the Chiyuv Karis, and from there maybe we could understand why there would be a difference between the beginning of the Zman Shechita and the end of the Zman Shechita. So the Rambam says in Hilchos Korban Pesach, Perek Hey Halacha Beis, which is the 9th Mar Makomos test in the Mar Makomos, Misha Shagag Onenas V'lo Hikra Barishon. If a person, by accident, or he was an ones and he wasn't able to bring the Korban Pesach on the first Korban Pesach, Im Hazid V'lo Hikra B'Sheni Chayv Karis. If he purposely does not bring the Korban Pesach on the second Pesach, right, in Pesach Sheni, so then he'd be Chayv Karis. But if on the second Korban Pesach he's also shogig or nonas, then he's potter, right? Because obviously a punishment of karis is only going to come to a person that is over this or on purpose. But we're pointing out, it doesn't matter which one he missed on purpose. I mean, if he missed the first one by accident, but the second one on purpose, he's already going to be chayav karis. He's if hikr v'rishon, or he's in makar b'sheni. If he purposely missed the first Pesach, then he's allowed to bring the Korban on the second Pesach, but if he doesn't bring it on the second Korban Pesach, even if it was an accident, he's still Chayav Karis, because he was amazed for not bringing it on the first Korban Pesach. So, if on one of the two, he's amazed, he's already going to be Chayav Karis. Aval, but now he brings a condition. Misha Yatame, Oberech Chachoka, V'Losasarishon. If he was Tame, or if he was far away, and he didn't bring the first Korban Pesach, Afal Pisha Hazid B'Sheni, even if he purposely doesn't bring the second Korban Pesach, Eino Chayav Karis, then he's not Chayav Karis. Shekvar Niftar B'Pesach Rishon Menach Karis, because he's already potter from the first Korban Pesach from Karis. So we see something interesting in this Rambam. What we see is that Tame and Derech Rechoka, it's not just Pshat that he's an ones. It's not just pshat that he couldn't bring the Korban Pesach and therefore he's potter from karis. It involves a greater patur, because even if he purposely doesn't bring the Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni, he's still going to be potter from karis. So this type of patur is above and beyond any other type of ones and shogeg. Therefore, explains the Shagas Aryeh, we see that the patur of karis from Tami and Derech Rechoka is not connected 100% to whether he could actually bring the Korban Pesach. Because we have a person that was Tameh on the first Pesach, and purposely didn't bring the Korban on the second Pesach, and he's still potter from Karis. So therefore, we could possibly say that the Rambam would understand the same thing would apply on the first Pesach. Or, not necessarily applying the first Pesach, but what constitutes Derech Hachoka if he's far enough away that he can't get there in the beginning of the Zman Shechita? That doesn't patter him from still getting there and bringing it until the end of this Zman Shechita. Right, let's say the beginning of the day is Netzach Hama, and he's 30 mil away. Maybe 30 is a little too far. He's 25 mil away. So there's no way he could get there by the beginning of this Zman Shechita. So we say, okay, now you have the din of Derech Rechoka. You have the din of Derech Rechoka. That doesn't mean he doesn't have to get to the base of Mikdash in order to bring the Korban. It just means that if after that point somehow he was shogeg or an ones and wasn't able to bring the Korban Pesach, he has upon him the din of Derech Hachoka. And it's going to have a big nafkamina for the second Pesach. That if he doesn't bring the second Pesach on purpose, he's still not going to be chayiv kares. It's like Gezeres HaKosuv, that derech hachoka is different. And that Gezeres HaKosuv applies in this situation. It has nothing to do with whether he actually has to go and bring the Korban Pesach or doesn't have to go to bring the Korban Pesach on the first Pesach. So therefore, according to the Rambam, we have a person that's far away. He's considered derech hachoka in the morning of Pesach Rishon, the morning of the 14th of Nisan. And he can make it there by the end of Shechita. So we would say, yes, you have a chiyuv to go. Is he derech hachoka? Yes, he's derech hachoka. What's the nafkamina? Nafkamina is kares for Pesach Sheni, right? But has no nafkamina for whether he has to go and bring the Korban Pesach now. That's.
Let's say he's too far. He can't never come.
Well, if he's way too far, so then he doesn't have a chiyuv at all. But the point is, what we're trying to explain is that the Rambam set himself up to explain derech hachoka as a situation where he really could make it before the end of the Zman. And he would still be called derech hachoka. That's the difficulty we're dealing with in the Rambam. You're right. If he can't make it at all, so he can't make it at all. And that's the way Tosfos always according to Tosfos, a derech hachoka is not going to be able to make it at all. But the Rambam, the way he explained the Gemara, has a case of derech hachoka, and he could make it. And the answer is, according to Shaggart, Aryeh, okay. So then that'll be the halacha, according to the Rambam, that he could make it, and therefore he has a chiyuv to make it, but he still has upon him the title of a derech hachoka person, which has different nafkaminas. As part of the Gezeres HaKosuv that tells us that derech hachoka is different than other situations.
Does that mean that guy's kares?
With the person behind, I believe the Shaggart is saying, and this is not 100% clear, I don't know if you have to say this, but from the way I understood from the Shaggart, if he would purposely miss the first Pesach, even if he's considered derech hachoka, but he could make it, and he purposely doesn't, then he would be chayiv kares on the first Pesach. And it's only have an nafkamina for the chayiv kares for the second Pesach. That's the way I understood the Shaggart. And the truth is, that's what it seems also from the Rambam, because the Rambam is explaining the nafkamina by the derech hachoka is the hezed b'sheni, chayiv kares. He doesn't speak about being hezed b'rishon. So therefore, it seems like Shaggart is making a correct reading of the Rambam. It seems that's why I understood from Shaggart that yes, there would be a chayiv kares for the person, even though he's a derech hachoka. But if he could make it to Yerushalayim anyway, and he purposely doesn't, so then he'd be chayiv. That's the way the Shaggart understood the Rambam. Okay, so the difficulty with this is it doesn't really fit with the Gemara itself in Pesachim. This is a continuation of that Gemara that we saw in this in Osiyot in the Mar Makomos. That Gufa Amar Ula says, Izuki derech hachoka, what's considered derech hachoka? Kol shein yochel yikanis b'shas shchita, if he can't come at the time of shchita. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shein yochel yikanis b'shas achila, as long as he can't get there when he's eating, at the time to eat the Korban Pesach. Because you don't have to actually be there to shech the Korban Pesach in order to be Yotzi Yechiv of Korban Pesach. Right? As we know, right, one person took the animal in for the whole group. So, Ula, the chiddush of the Torah of derech hachoka, of not being able to come at the time of shechita, is a chiddush, because he doesn't really need to be there at the time of shechita, as long as someone else shechted for him. As long as he could get there at the time of eating the Korban Pesach, which is the shita of Rav Yehuda over here. So Amalei Rabba Ula. So Rabba asked Ula, Ladidach Kasha. According to you, it's a question. Rav Yehuda Kasha, there's a question according to Yehuda. We'll see the question only according to Ula. That Ladidach Kasha, according to Ula, there's a question. Marta, you said, Kol shein yochel yikanis b'shas shchita, that as long as you can't come in during the time of shchita, v'hatami sheretz, din yochel yikanis b'shas shchita. A person who's tame with a sheretz, he can't come into the base of mikdash during the time of shchita because he needs to go to the mikvah. And even after he goes to the mikvah, he has the status of harash shemesh. He needs to wait until tseis in order to become tahar. In which case, that means he's not going to be able to come into the azar at the time of shchita at all. But nevertheless, you said shochem azar al tami sheretz. According to Ula, it's about machlokas amaram. There, Rav disagrees, but according to Ula, you could shech the Korban Pesach for a person who's tami sheretz because he'll go to the mikvah, he'll wait till nightfall, and then he'll be able to eat the Korban Pesach with everybody else. The fact that he can't come in at the time of the shechita doesn't make a difference. So what we see over here, though, is that Ula, who's the one that said the whole 15 mil has to do with getting to Yerushalayim at the time of shechita, we're comparing it to someone that's a Tami Sheretz that can't come in at the time of shechita. But if we understood the Ram like we just understood, there's no connection between Tami Sheretz and derech hachoka. Derech hachoka is some Gezeres HaKosuv that has nothing to do with whether he'd actually be in the Hazar at the time of the shechita. Because as we explained, the Ram would hold, even if he could get there during the shechita, as long as he can't get there in the beginning of the Zman of shechita, he's already derech hachoka. But the Tami Sheretz, he can't come in at all. right? He's not going to be able to eat the entire time of Shechita. It seems clear from the Gemara that Ula's 15 mil for the Derech Rechoka is referring to someone that's not going to be able to get there at all during this amount of Shechita all the way until the end. And that again would fit with the opinion of Tosfos, the way he explained the Gemara, not with the way the Rambam explained. Another question on the Rambam, which is, it's a little bit hair splitting, but this is the way we always learn Gemara whenever we talk about Zman, is, according to the Rambam, let's say he's exactly 15 mil outside of Yerushalayim. So would we say exactly 15 mil is Derech Rechoka? Or no, exactly 15 mil he can get there, but more than 15 mil is a Derech Rechoka. So if we were looking at it from the Rambam's point of view, that the whole idea is he could get to the Azara to do the Shechita, so if he's 15 mil away from Yerushalayim, so then he should have to go, because he will get there immediately at the time of Shechita. And then, of course, after that, he's going to do the Shechita. Right? I mean, he's not going to, no one's doing the Shechita at exactly Chatzos. Right? So he would hit 15 mil to get there. He would get there exactly at Chatzos. Right? Just like anyone else who would be there at exactly at Chatzos. And then he would shech the Karban Pesach. So for exactly 15 mil, he should be chayiv. In other words, he should be considered close, not far. However, that's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said that if you're exactly 15 mil, you're considered far. You're not considered close. That really works according to Tosfos, because according to Tosfos, that means from Chatzos until Shkia. Shkia is the last time I can shech. So that means if I'm 15 mil away, I'm going to get there at Shkia, it's too late. Right? You get there at Shkia, it's too late. So therefore, 15 mil is already too far. You have to get there before Shkia if you want to shech the Karban Pesach. You can't get there at Shkia. As opposed to the Rambam, to get there at Chatzos would be perfect. Right? So therefore, the halacha, the way it comes out from the Mishnah, which is that exactly 15 mil is considered too far, only works with the explanation of Tosfos. It does not work with the explanation of the Rambam. And the final question against the Rambam is a Yerushalmi. Mefurish Yerushalmi, not like the Rambam. In Pesachim, Perek Tes Halacha Beis, and that's Osiyad Alf the Marmakomos, Hayanasun Min Hamodias Ulifnim. If a person is from Modian and in Kodem L'Shei Shos, before 6 hours of the day, Yatzalo Kodem L'Shei Shos, Yochli Yechayev, and it was before Chatzos, he was inside the area that's Chayev Karban Pesach. But before Chatzos came, he left. He went outside of the area of Modian. Yochli Yechayev, you would think he's Chayev. Tamalomar, therefore it says, V'chad Lasos, Hechtal b'shas asiya chayev, shelo b'shas asiya potter. So, I'm not 100% sure exactly what the drasha is, but the drasha is teaching us that we view it at the time of the asiya. Where is he when you could start shechting the Karban Pesach? That's when we view it. So even though before, already during this day, he was already close enough to go to Yerushalayim, but it doesn't make a difference. As long as from Chatzos on, he wasn't in range to get into Yerushalayim, so then he's considered far away. So we see very clearly from Yerushalmi, like the explanation of Tosfos, that we're going from Chatzos on. That's how we're viewing the Zman of Derech Rechoka. So therefore, we, according to Shaget's Arya, we can disregard the explanation of the Rambam on this Gemara. So we have just the explanation of Tosfos. Now, we said according to Tosfos, the way it came out is that the Shechitas HaPesach has to be before Shkia. And that matched up with the opinion of Tosfos that the Karbonos are brought before Shkia, which would then teach us the halacha by Tfilas Mincha. However, the Shaget's Arya, he wants to explain the whole sugya a little bit differently. Or not really the whole sugya, but what we can glean from the sugya a little bit differently. And he says, as we've been explaining up until now, there's 4 avodos in the Karban, as we spoke about last week. There's the Shechita, Kabbalas Adam, Halachas Adam, and Zrika. All we've been talking about in this Gemara in Pesachim is the Shechita. Shechting the Karban Pesach has to be done before Shkia. But who says that the sprinkling of the blood has to be done before Shkia? Maybe the sprinkling of the blood could be done after Shkia. And that would have nothing, that would not impact the Derech Rechoka at all. Because Derech Rechoka means he can't get there in time to bring the Karban Pesach. If he comes after Shkia, the fact that other people can still be sprinkling the blood of their Karban Pesach is not going to help him, because he didn't check his Karban Pesach. He's too late. So the fact that he can't get there before Shkia makes him too late, because that's the last time he could shecht. but it doesn't tell us anything about the last time he could sprinkle the blood. Ula himself used the lashon shchita, as we saw in the Gemara on Sadi Gilman on Beis, and Os Yud, we saw that. She'in yachli kanis b'shash shchita, so he's talking only about shchita. And he says you really have to explain that way according to Tosfos as well, because how did Tosfos explain? Tosfos explained if there's less than 15 mil between where I'm standing at Chatzos and Yerushalayim, then I have to go. Why do I have to go? Because I could get there. So let's say I'm exactly 15 mil. So I'm going to get there right before, I'm a little bit less than 15 mil. We said 15 mil is already too far. I'm a little less than 15 mil. So I'm going to get there right before Shkia. So I'm going to be able to shech my Korban Pesach, but I'm not going to be able to do all the avodos. And that takes a certain amount of time. So it should be derech rechoka if I'm already can't get to Yerushalayim enough time before Shkia to be able to do all my avodos. But that's not what it says. It says as long as I get there right before Shkia, I'm already considered close enough. That's because I could do the Shchita. Shchita is a 1 second thing. And then the rest of the avodos, I have time. I have time after Shkia. So from the Gemara itself, we see that we're talking only about Shkia and not the other avodos. The reason for this, says the Shagas Aryeh, is based on the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, in Shemos, Parak Yud Beis, Pasuk Vav, which is a Pasuk in Parashas Bo. V'shachtu also kol kahal Yisrael bein harbaim. That all Klal Yisrael shechted the Korban Pesach bein harbaim. Bein harbaim is like an afternoon time. And the Shagas Aryeh wants to explain that bein harbaim refers to Chatzos until Shkia. That's what bein harbaim refers to. If it's after Shkia, it's already not called Bein Arbaim. It's called Erev. Or it's called something else. It's not called Bein Arbaim. So therefore we see the Pasuk is telling us that the Zaman Shchita is until Shkia. That's what we see from the Pasuk. And the Shagas Aryeh is not alone in explaining the Pasuk this way. He brings a Ramban. The Ramban says as follows. On that Pasuk, Hazman Hazeh, Hu Kol Eis Ruach HaShemesh B'Rikia. This time of Bein Arbaim is when the sun is shining. Once the sun sets, which is about an hour and a quarter before Tseis, which Shagat explains doesn't really work out, but that exact time, but in general about that time. It's not a time to shecht anymore. It's not called Arbaim. We would call it Erev. So the Ramban explains the pasuk that way, that Bein Arbaim is saying that it's not all the way until the evening, and that's specifically when you have to shecht. Therefore, he says when the pasuk in Bamidbar, which talks about the Korban Pesach, says B'chodesh Hasheni Ba'arba'asar Yom Bein Harbaim Yasu Oso, and this is really talking about the Pesach Sheni, which has the same dinim as far as the Korban itself as Pesach Rishon, and it says Bein Harbaim Yasu Oso, you should do it. So the Yasu over here, what are you doing? It's going to be referring to Shchita. How do I know? Because the Bein Harbaim by the Pesach HaMitzrayim said it was referring to specifically the Shechita. That's what it said explicitly in the Pasuk talked about the Shechita. It didn't speak about sprinkling the blood, even though they did have a type of sprinkling the blood in Mitzrayim. They sprinkled on the doorposts. Nevertheless, that's referring to Shechita. So therefore also when it says Asiyah can mean anything. It can mean any of the avodos. It doesn't say you do something. So that Asiyah that it's referring to in Parshas Baloscha we'll have in a couple of weeks also is referring to specifically the Shechita. And he brings a proof to this from the Gemara in Zvachim, Daf Tzadi Aleph Amud Aleph, in Os Yud Beis, in the Mar Makomos. The Gemara says as follows: Ibailahu. The question is, Tadir v'sheinu Tadir. If you have a carbon which is Tadir and a carbon which is not Tadir. So generally we always say Tadir v'sheinu Tadir, Tadir kodem. We know that's the rule. Now in this case, the kadam shachit l'sheinu Tadir. He shechted the not Tadir carbon first. He did what he wasn't supposed to do. So now we have a situation, the carbon which wasn't supposed to be shechted first was shechted first. So what do you do now? Mi amrinan, do we say, kivan de shachte makrivlei, once you shechted it, so finish it up. Odilmar, perhaps.
Isn't it pickle?
No, pickle is a completely different concept. Tadir is just a lichachila din. Carbon is 100% kosher. The question is, though, how to proceed lichachila from now on. So do we say, once you shechted it, so you finish it off, finish the whole carbon, and sprinkle the blood? Odilmar, perhaps, yav la'achar de memaris b'dam, will give it to someone else to stir the blood, because blood will congeal if you don't move it around. So give it to someone else to stir. ad makavli tadir, until you first bring the tadir korban, v'hadar makavli tadir, and then you'll go back to the korban which is supposed to be second, and you'll finish that one up. So this is really the way the Shagged explains it. It's a question of two conflicting concepts. You have the idea of tadir, and the idea of ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos. Ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos means if I'm in the middle of one mitzvah, I don't drop it in order to do a different mitzvah. Or even if I'm not in the middle yet, if I have to pass up one mitzvah that I'm supposed to be doing now in order to do a second mitzvah, so I don't do that. I do the mitzvah that I come to first. So here I'm already holding the blood of the korban. I shouldn't have shechted it first, but I did. So now I have this blood of the korban in my hand. So I have a ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos in regards to this blood. And I have a different concept of tadir she'eino tadir that really I should go and shecht the other korban first. So that's the question. In this situation, what do you do? So we're going to skip down until where it says Amar li Rav Acha Breder Rav Ashi Ravina, which is, if you'll see the last one on the line, is Rav. Right? Amar li Rav Acha Breder Ravina, sorry, Breder Rav Ashi Ravina. So he explains as follows. Shachtu kodem chatzos pasol, v'nei shenemar bo bein harbayim. We know that if you bring the korban pesach before chatzos, it's pasol, because the pasuk says bein harbayim. Bein harbayim is in the afternoon. Kodem l'tamid, if you bring before the tamid, means the tamid shall be in harbayim, kosher, it's kosher. V'yehema maris bedamo ad shizur kadam. And you just have someone stir the blood until they sprinkle the blood of the tamid. Right? So you see over there, the korban tamid, we always bring the korban tamid shall be in harbayim before the korban pesach. So you're supposed to bring a why? Tadir she'eino tadir tadir kodem. You're supposed to bring the korban pesach first. Sorry, other way around. You're supposed to bring the korban tamid first because it's tadir. Here he did it wrong. Now he has the blood of the korban pesach. So this is exactly our question. What do you do now? And it says explicitly what to do. You first shech the korban tamid, and then you sprinkle the blood of the korban pesach, or you sprinkle the blood of the korban tamid, and then you sprinkle the blood of the korban pesach. So that should answer our question. So the Gemara answers, it doesn't answer the question, because Hachamei Askinon, we're talking about a case going to Kadam Shachte L'Tamid Bereisha. You first shechted the korban tamid. In other words, so I shechted the korban tamid, then I shechted the korban pesach before I sprinkled the blood of the korban tamid. I wasn't supposed to do that. So now I have both of the bloods in front of me, so it's really just a din at this point of tadir she'eino tadir. There's no din of ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos anymore. That's what I do. So Amarle Rav Acha Sabel Rav Ashni Masisanami Deiko Diktani. We see this also from the Mishnah, which says Ad shizur kadam, until you sprinkle the blood. V'lo katani, but didn't say Ad sheyishchot v'yizok dam, until you shech the korban pesach and sprinkle the blood. Shemai, so we see that this is a correct answer. That in fact we're talking about a situation where the korban tamid was already shechted. Okay. Now the Shagged points out, why is it that we're bringing the korban tamid before the korban pesach? So based on the Gemara that we saw, it seems like the reason would be because of tadir she'eino tadir. Korban tamid is tadir, and therefore we have to bring it before the korban pesach. However, the Shagged points out, there's another reason why we also bring the korban tamid before the korban pesach, and that's the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Nun Ches to Nun Tes, which is Yud Gimel in the Mara Makomos, and it says there as follows: Taner Rabbanan, Tamid Kodem LePesach. The Tamid comes before the Korban Pesach. Pesach Kodem LeKtaros, Ktaros Ktomas Laneros. And the Pesach comes before the Ktaros, which comes before the Halachas Aneros. Yu'uchar Davar Shenemar Bo Be'erev Bein Harbayim, L'Davar Shelo Nemar Bo Be'erev, Ela Bein Harbayim Bilvad. The reason is, by the Korban Pesach, it uses the wording Erev, and it uses the wording Bein Harbayim, and therefore we put that later than the Korban Tamid, which only says Bein Harbayim, and it doesn't use the word Erev at all. So that's why the Korban Pesach the Korban Tamid comes before the Korban Pesach. So it turns out we really have two reasons why the Korban Tamid comes before the Korban Pesach. One, because of Tadir she'eino tadir tadir kodem, and another reason is because the pasuk says a specific order. Right? It teaches a specific order by using these words of Erev and Bein Harbayim. Now, explains the Shagas Arya. If the reason in the Gemara of Pesachim applies, then it wouldn't be applicable at all to the Gemara in Zvachim that we just quoted about Tadir versus ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos. Because the only question of Tadir and ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos is if it's only Tadir and ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos. If we have another svara of the pasuk tells you an order, so then we wouldn't worry anymore about ein mavir nal ha-mitzvos. He brings, for example, we know that you have to put on the tefillin shel yad before you put on the tefillin shel rosh. Why? Because we learned from the psukim that the tefillin shel yad comes before the tefillin shel rosh. If a person would take out of the tefillin bag first his tefillin shel rosh, so now in his hand he has the tefillin shel rosh, he didn't put on the tefillin shel yad yet, so now we have a problem, ein ma'avirin al mitzvos. Maybe you should put on the tefillin shel rosh first. So we say no. Since the pasuk says you put on the tefillin shel yad first, so you are ma'avirin al mitzvos. You put down the tefillin shel rosh, and you take the tefillin shel yad, and you put the tefillin shel yad first. It would have nothing, it wouldn't teach us anything about a case of tadir and sheino tadir. The truth is, by tadir and ein ma'avirin al mitzvos, I think we say the opposite. For example, when it comes to tefillin and tzitzis, or the talis, we put on the talis first, because it's tadir, because you do a talis also on Shabbos and Yontif, which you don't do with the tefillin. So therefore you put on the talis first, and then you put on the tefillin. But if for whatever reason you would have the tefillin first, you would pick up the tefillin in your hand before you put on the talis, you would put the tefillin on first, because of ein ma'avirin al mitzvos. So we see that tadir and a different reason to be maktiv something is not the same when it comes to ein ma'avirin al mitzvos. So therefore we wouldn't be able to bring a proof from the order of the Karban Pesach and the order, compared to the order of the Karban Tamid, that would have nothing to do with the sugya and zvachim of ein ma'avirin al mitzvos and tadir, because there's a different factor involved, which is the order that the Pesukim set. So how do we answer this question? How do we explain the Gemara and zvachim? He says the only way to explain it is if we understand that bein harbayim was only in reference to the shechita. Right? Going back to the way he explained the pasuk. When it says bein harbayim yasu oso, that you do the Karban Pesach bein harbayim, that's only the shechita. That pasuk's not talking about the zrika. So then I understand very good. I already did the shechita of the Karban Pesach. So now what I'm left with is sprinkling the blood of the Karban Pesach and shechting, let's say, the Karban Tamid, according to Havamina, before we get to the answer. So now I have the blood of the Karban Pesach. It doesn't say bein harbayim by the blood of the Karban Pesach. Therefore, I don't have this gzeres hakasav that we spoke about just now, right? In Osi Gil Makomos, that gzeres hakasav, that the Karban Pesach comes after the Karban Tamid. I don't have that gzeres hakasav. That was only talking about the shechita. We're already done the shechita. I'm now talking about sprinkling the blood. Sprinkling the blood doesn't have that gzeres hakasav, because that's not what the pasuk's talking about. So now all I have left is tadir sheino tadir. Oh, so now it fits into that Gemara and zvachim. So that's how we could explain the Gemara and zvachim, that it is talking about a case of tadir sheino tadir, because it's talking about sprinkling the blood of the Karban Pesach as opposed to the Karban Tamid. We don't have the issue of being harbayim, because it's not what the pasuk is talking about, and therefore that's a proof to the Shagas Aryeh that when the psukim say bein harbayim by the Karban Pesach, that which, as we explained, means before shkia, only the shechita. It's only talking about the shechita of the psukim. The psukim are not talking about the zrika, which means really the zrika could be done after shkia, and if so, certainly by Karban Tamid the zrika could be done after shchita, after shkia, which would mean certainly our tfilas mincha, which is keneged the zrika of the blood, also certainly can be after shkia. That's where we're going to leave off tonight, and we're going to continue with the rest of the proofs in the upcoming weeks. Okay.